When you're building intelligent workflows, the dream outcome, of course, is that your workflow is built so well that it can handle anything that's thrown at it. In other words, if someone types the date in the wrong format, or the document has a piece of information missing, or the category that the user has specified doesn't exist in your database, that the workflow can handle those errors, either by deciding what to do with them or to flag for human review. As you're building, error handling can be seen kind of as a secondary stage or aspect to the way that you build your workflows, where you enhance the initial workflow that you designed. The first step of your build process is where you design the core functionality of your workflow. For example, receive the invoice, extract the data, find the customer, log the row, and send to your CRM. And then in the second stage, you test this with different data or scenarios. And as you do this, you encounter errors and gradually incorporate more details into the workflow to manage the edge cases that weren't considered in the initial design. In this part of the course, we're going to hear directly from Evan Furniss, one of the most experienced Glide experts when it comes to building with workflows. He's built many of Glide's AI agents and works with some of our largest customers. Error handling is really for your entire workflow. It's not just about getting AI to work well. With error handling, essentially, you are checking that something has happened, often because there's a critical piece of data that powers something 5 or 6 steps below in the workflow. And if it didn't happen or wasn't expected, then the workflow needs to handle that. At a high level, it's also really useful to think of errors as either content-based or state-based. And this is something that Evan spoke about. So let's hear from him.
I like to think of errors that are content-based and errors that are empty or not empty state-based. And what I mean by that is when I say content, let's take for an example an invoice. There's really critical details within an invoice and each invoice that needs to be extracted by the AI. The invoice number, the PO number, the dates, the net terms, the line items, all those different things. Now, if let's just say we didn't get back an invoice number, that's a problem. So there's a flag there. But what is also a problem is if that invoice is in a different currency than the business's native currency. So we also want to check for those things as well. And the AI is really good at understanding what content-wise you are expecting. So we need to check for that and flag for those things and handle those. And then there's another option of this empty, not empty state. Let's say that we didn't find an invoice number flat out. Well, that's a different kind of error. And it may be flagged, but the route that we may take is different.
Right, so basically content-based errors come up when the data received is unexpected in some way, or the agent isn't sure what to do with it, and state-based errors are just when the data is actually missing. As I mentioned at the start of this video, it's good to build out the automation's core functionality first without thinking too much about error handling. Essentially, you are building for an ideal environment, which doesn't really ever exist if you have lots of usage or users. And this is how Evan builds. The error steps will just end up surfacing as you're building out the workflow and testing it. Another distinction is actually to do error handling after particular sections of your workflow have completed, particularly if it's a large one. In more complex workflows, you'll find this, that you can break down a very large and in-depth workflow into maybe 2 or 3 chunks. For example, this is the bit that grabs the data, this is the bit that extracts the data, and this is the bit that checks the data.
So, for example, with invoices, it was going through all these AI steps, and I noticed that there's this very specific spot where we switch from analyzing and structuring the invoice in a certain way to we now need to either add the invoice, set a bunch of columns, set statuses, and do more of, I guess, the boring work inside of a workflow, which is just add all the things to where they need to go. So there's this very clear divide there, and right there's a really key spot where you can start adding error handling. I've done all the processing, let's check the processing, now let's add the things.
So the workflow editor has a great debugging system that helps you diagnose exactly what happened when your workflows ran. Many times you can actually just work out what kind of error handling you need without diving into this part of the editor, but sometimes it's worth digging into the data. Here's what Evan had to say.
So to help figure out where these error handlers sit within a workflow, I use the debugging tool on the right side of workflows to run through, like in this example of invoices, run through like 10 invoices. And of those 10 on my first iteration of running the workflow, I may only get 3 to succeed. And then I'll go through the other 7 in the debugging tool and see where the errors happen and what happened, and then take note of those and then try to fix them one by one, which then starts the implementation. So the implementation of error handling. When we're building the workflow, it's get the workflow to do the thing that we want once, and then get it to do it 10 times, and then get it to do it 100 times, and then get it to do it 1,000 times. And probably by the time you're there, you can go ahead and start rolling it out to users and letting them try it. And that's where you're going to get the bunch of different use cases and find really, really small things that you can either account for with error handling or flag for human review, which we'll also talk about.
And here's a quick walkthrough from Evan on how he uses the debugger.
So when I'm looking at the debug tool on the right-hand side under Run History, you can select the red run of your workflow and then take a look and find the red node within the workflow, the red step within the workflow. And then that'll tell you what happened. When you're not accounting for these errors yet, you may find things like couldn't add because all the things that you're trying to add are empty, or tried to add text to a number column, something like that. Those things will be what you're looking for and will give you more insight on what happened in the workflow, so that you can add error handling to maneuver past those, flag for human review, try another route, for example.
So that's an overview of error handling. In the next few videos, we're going to go more in depth on this topic and the different ways that you can approach it. We're going to cover how to automate reviews, flagging, UI for human review of these errors, and some advice on how to solve and approach the many different edge cases that can come up.